He followed a stray dog into a mountain fortress. A midnight bark revealed a truth. Hidden 70 years, he thought the dog needed saving. But later, when investigators asked him how a half-frozen stray managed to drag him into a forgotten fortress and expose a conspiracy older than both of them combined, Ethan could only say one thing. The night I pulled him from the storm, I didn't rescue him. He was already on a mission. I was just the only human left who could finish it. The storm had swallowed the Bitterroot Mountains whole. It came without warning, rolling down from the high ridges like a living thing, a white fury that scraped the earth clean and stripped the world down to nothing. The wind pummeled Ethan Rowe's cabin with the desperation of something trying to claw its way inside. Every gust rattled the thin window glass so hard it felt like the mountain itself was shivering. Ethan sat at the small wooden table, a foreclosure notice spread in front of him like a verdict. The paper was too clean for this place, too sharp. It looked like it belonged in a courtroom somewhere, not inside a drafty hunting cabin patched with duct tape and stubbornness. The words blurred, not because he couldn't read them, but because a part of him refused to. Another failure, another thing he had managed to lose. 8 years of isolation, and still the guilt had claws. He rubbed a hand over his face, feeling the roughness of an untrimmed beard, the exhaustion in his bones. In another lifetime, he had been an Air Force rescue technician. He had been the guy they dropped into hell to pull someone back out. He'd carried men on his shoulders through fire, through shrapnel, through things normal people shouldn't see. But he hadn't been able to save Tom Barron. That one name dragged behind every one of Ethan's breaths like a weight hung around his ribs. Outside, the storm roared louder, shoving against the walls. Snow forced itself through the gaps under the door. Ethan stared at the paper as if staring long enough might make it burn. Then he heard it. A short, sharp bark cut through the wind. Ethan froze. It wasn't the drawn-out howl of a coyote, not the frantic chatter of an animal fleeing the storm. This was deliberate, precise. A warning? A call? He didn't know, but it slipped under his skin in a way he couldn't ignore. Then it came again, closer this time. A low sound, almost swallowed by the blizzard, but unmistakably a bark. Something alive was out there. Ethan pushed back from the table so fast his chair scraped loud against the floor. Instinct moved before logic did. The part of him that had once run toward danger, toward chaos, toward people who needed help, yanked him to the door. The cold punched him in the face when he cracked it open. Snow barreled in sideways, stealing his breath. But in that violent white, something dark moved. A heavy shape staggered forward, slipped, and collapsed against his doorstep. A dog. No, not just a dog. A German shepherd, but unlike any Ethan had ever seen. Its coat was thick and storm-colored, grey streaked with silver. Snow clung to it like frost on metal. One paw was lifted off the ground, twisted at an angle that sent a jolt of instinctive pain through Ethan's own leg. The animal shivered violently, breath coming in sharp, wounded bursts. But even in that state, its eyes locked onto him. Amber eyes, clear, intelligent, focused in a way that made the hairs on the back of his neck rise. This dog hadn't wandered to his cabin. It had come for him. Ethan didn't question it. He dropped to his knees, hooked his arms under the shepherd's chest, and hauled it inside, shutting the door hard against the wind. Snow spilled across the floorboards as he set the dog down near the small fireplace. The shepherd didn't growl, didn't snap. It simply watched him, its gaze unwavering. That calm stare felt like being studied, evaluated, judged. Ethan grabbed a blanket and draped it over the dog, then gently inspected the injured paw. A clean cut, not deep, but precise. Not the kind of injury you got stumbling through the woods. More like slicing through metal debris or stepping into a trap. He whispered without thinking. "Where did you come from, boy?" The dog gave a soft exhale, almost an answer. Ethan reached for the collar. It wasn't leather, not nylon, but paracord, braided in a tight weave he recognized instantly. That knot pattern belonged to specialized units during the Korean War era. Old, military, handcrafted. A chill deeper than the cold outside slid down Ethan's spine. What kind of stray wears a collar like that? A sudden thud hit the roof. Snow avalanche, wind, he didn't know, but the shepherd lifted its head sharply, ears twitching. The dog wasn't afraid. It was assessing. Then, without warning, it barked once, powerfully, commanding, as if trying to tell him something urgent. Ethan stepped back, unsettled by how purposeful the sound was. The dog shifted, forcing itself upright despite the injury. It limped toward the door, looked back at him and barked again. Not a plea. A directive. Ethan crossed his arms. "You want me to follow you? In this storm?" The shepherd waited, steady and silent. It wasn't random. This moment wasn't random. Ethan felt it deep in his chest, an old instinct flickering back to life. The instinct that moved operators toward danger because someone needed them, because something demanded action. He shook his head. "This is insane." But then the dog did something that cracked his breath in half. It stepped toward him, leaned its head against his thigh just long enough for him to feel the tremor in its body. Not fear. Urgency. A silent plea. A silent command. The same gesture Tom used to make before a mission, when words weren't enough. Ethan swallowed hard. The shepherd backed towards the door, waiting for his decision. And for the first time in 8 years, Ethan felt the world shift beneath his feet. Not because the storm outside was breaking the mountains open, but because something had just walked into his life with the certainty of destiny. He grabbed his coat. "All right, boy, show me." He opened the door. The storm screamed in his face. The shepherd limped into the white. Ethan followed. The storm eased by morning, but the cold inside the cabin didn't lift. Ethan woke to the faint sound of steady breathing near the fire. Hawk lay curled on the floor, wrapped in the blanket Ethan had given him, but his eyes were already open, already watching, not the dull, drifting gaze of a recovering stray. Focused, alert, tracking Ethan's every move. Ethan crouched beside him. "Morning, Hawk, if that even is your name." The dog didn't blink. His ears twitched as if acknowledging the sound, but he made no attempt to stand, no sign of fear or distrust. Instead, he studied Ethan the way a seasoned operator studies a room before kicking down a door. Calm, calculated, reading every detail. Ethan checked the injured paw again. The swelling had gone down, far quicker than he expected. The cut was clean. The bleeding stopped. Hawk eased the paw toward the ground gently, testing it, and Ethan watched in disbelief as the dog bore weight on it with only a faint wince. "That isn't normal." He rose and stepped back, giving the dog room. Hawk stood, shook himself softly, and then walked in a slow, deliberate circle. A small limp remained, but it looked like recovery was already underway. Overnight. Ethan felt a prickle across his scalp. "You're full of surprises, buddy." Hawk moved toward the door. Not toward the water bowl, not toward the food Ethan had left on a plate. Straight to the door. He sat in front of it. Then he looked back at Ethan. A silent summons. Ethan crossed his arms. "You want me to open that? After last night? Not happening." Hawk barked. One single, sharp sound. Not frantic. Not begging. Commanding. Ethan stared at him. It was too intentional, too precise. Every part of this dog's behavior felt more like training than instinct. He reached down again to inspect the paracord collar. The weave pattern was tight and intricate, a king cobra knot with an older, nearly forgotten technique. Ethan hadn't seen that style since a museum exhibit on covert units from the Second World War, units that specialized in mountain warfare, units that trained dogs for reconnaissance in harsh terrain. His breath thinned. Impossible. That program ended decades ago. He turned the collar in his hands until he found something he hadn't seen last night. Worn into the inner braid were 3 small, faded impressions. Letters. J.H. Ethan's chest tightened. Harper. No, it couldn't be. The name hit him harder than he expected. Major James Harper was a ghost from military folklore, a decorated officer from the early Cold War who vanished during a classified operation somewhere in the Rockies. Theories claimed he'd uncovered something dark, something he wasn't meant to find. And here, in Ethan's hand, was a collar built in the exact style of Harper's unit, with Harper's initials. Ethan swallowed. That's not a coincidence. He looked at Hawk again, really looked at him. The dog's posture wasn't hopeful or grateful. It wasn't even submissive. It was expectant, as if Hawk had come here for a reason, and now that he'd found Ethan, his mission could continue. You came to me. Ethan whispered it like a confession. Why? Hawk didn't move. He simply held Ethan's stare, amber eyes like twin embers glowing through smoke. There was no fear, no hesitation, only certainty. Ethan stepped closer. Tell me what you want. The dog lifted one paw, his injured one, and placed it gently against the bottom of the door. A deliberate tap. Then another. Tap. Tap. Ethan blinked. That was intentional. Hawk backed up a step, looked straight into Ethan's eyes, then back at the door again. You're leading me somewhere. A gust of wind slammed against the cabin wall, reminding Ethan what waited outside. Snow still rose in drifts as tall as his chest. Temperatures would drop again by nightfall, and last night had nearly buried them both. He shook his head. Not happening. You're hurt. I'm not dragging you back into that storm. Hawk tilted his head, studying him with a quiet patience that made Ethan feel absurdly exposed, as though the dog was assessing him, judging his resolve. Then, without warning, Hawk limped past Ethan, moved to the table, and nudged the foreclosure notice off the edge with his nose. It floated to the floor, landing at Ethan's feet. Hawk placed a paw on it, pinning it down, then looked back up. Ethan froze. That wasn't random, that was communication. A dry laugh escaped him, edged with disbelief and something like fear. You're kidding me. You want me to leave this place? Now? Hawk didn't blink. Something in Ethan's chest shifted painfully, something he had tried to bury in silence. A thing shaped like purpose, like the first spark of a flame. He crouched, his voice low. Why me? Hawk didn't answer with a sound. He didn't need to. He stepped forward and placed his head against Ethan's knee, a soft but steady pressure that unlocked something deep and old inside him. The same gesture Tom Barron used back before every dangerous drop, a simple touch that meant trust, readiness, go time. Ethan inhaled sharply. All right, he exhaled. Fine, you win, Hawk, but you're staying close. He stood, grabbed his coat and slung his emergency pack over his shoulder. He opened the door. The cold bit through him instantly. The whiteout wind screamed like a warning. Hawk stepped past him into the storm without hesitation. No fear, no doubt. Even with the limp, even with the cold, he moved like a soldier returning to the front. Ethan locked the cabin behind him, heart pounding. A stray dog wouldn't behave like this. A normal dog wouldn't have found him in this storm. Normal dog wouldn't have worn Harper's collar. Hawk started forward, nose to the wind, following a line only he could see. Ethan followed him. It wasn't bravery, it wasn't logic. It was the weight of a name on a collar. the weight of a past that refused to stay buried. Something was waiting out there, and Hawk intended to lead him straight to it. Night closed around them like a tightening fist. The storm had quieted, but the air still carried a sharpened cold that sliced through Ethan's coat. Snow hung low in the trees, bending branches under its weight. The world felt muffled, as though the mountains were holding their breath. Hawk moved ahead with a certainty that made Ethan's nerves claw awake. Even with the limp, the shepherd's gait was measured, purposeful. He didn't wander. He didn't sniff around or hesitate at forks in the path. He cut through the forest along invisible lines, choosing routes that used the terrain for cover, avoiding exposed ridges, slipping between stands of fir where the wind weakened. Ethan recognized the pattern too quickly to pretend it was coincidence. This was infiltration movement, the kind taught to units who expected to be hunted. Every step tightened the coil of suspicion twisting in his gut. Who trained you, Hawk? Or more terrifying, who trained the one who sent you? The dog paused at a fallen log, scanned the dark tree line, then looked back to make sure Ethan was still behind him. Not a pet checking on its human, more like a partner confirming formation integrity. Ethan exhaled, watching the fog of his breath rise. "All right, soldier, lead on." They descended into a narrow ravine where the snow deepened to Ethan's knees. Hawk powered through, plowing a small trough that Ethan followed. Moonlight broke through a gap in the clouds, revealing for a moment the dog's breath coming out in short bursts, the silver in his coat catching the light like frost on steel. Ethan wiped the sweat forming under his hood despite the cold. The silence was growing heavier, too still, too controlled. Then Hawk stopped. So abruptly Ethan nearly collided with him. The dog's ears pricked, his gaze narrowing toward a cluster of granite boulders ahead. Ethan looked, but saw nothing except rock and shadow. The mountains stretched upward like black monoliths. The forest thinned, replaced by a jagged wall of stone rising out of the snow like the edge of a fortress. Hawk didn't hesitate. He limped toward the wall. Ethan's breath slowed as they approached. The granite face ahead was enormous, a solid sheet rising nearly 30 feet before vanishing into the dark. There were no cracks, no crevices, no caves, nothing but a cold, smooth surface polished by decades of storms. A dead end. Ethan frowned. "Hawk, where are you taking me?" The dog didn't stop until his nose nearly touched the cliff. He sniffed the stone with a strange intensity, moving along its surface as though reading a text only he could see. Then he halted at a point that looked no different from the rest. He looked at Ethan. Then Hawk raised his injured paw. Ethan stepped forward. "Wait, don't hurt it again." But Hawk pressed the paw against a seemingly random slab of rock. A soft, muted click echoed under Ethan's boots. The entire mountain seemed to exhale. A thin vertical line of white light traced itself up the face of the granite, splitting it into two perfect halves. Ethan stumbled back, pulse hammering in his ears. This cannot be real. The seam widened as the slab shifted inward, dust and ice falling from the edges. A deep mechanical hum rolled from within the cliff, like old machinery awakening after decades of sleep. The granite wall slid aside. Behind it was a steel door so thick it looked capable of surviving a nuclear blast. Bolt locks as large as Ethan's forearm lined its edges. The brushed metal surface reflected the moonlight in a muted glow. Ethan stared, unable to breathe. A hidden bunker, not modern. Older, Cold War era, judging by the lock design and the reinforced plating. But no such facility had ever been recorded in the Bitterroot. He knew that for a fact. He had studied every topographic map of this range during his isolated years. Nothing like this existed on paper. This was off the books. Very off the books. Hawk stood before the steel door, tail still, posture tight, waiting. Ethan approached the threshold, feeling a rush of warm, filtered air slip past him from inside, impossibly out of place in the frozen night. Who built this place? The storm outside seemed to fall away, replaced by a tense silence that felt heavier than the stone walls. Ethan reached out and touched the cold steel. The door vibrated faintly under his hand. Alive, a machine waiting for a command. Hawk nudged his thigh. Ethan whispered, barely audible, "You brought me to this." Then the dog did something that tightened Ethan's throat. He walked to the small control panel beside the door, placed his paw on a recessed square, and held it there. The square lit up beneath the paw. Recognition. Biometric. But for a dog. Ethan stepped back, stunned. A low whirring began. Locks disengaged in sequence, metal sliding against metal. The steel door eased open with a heavy hiss of pressure equalizing, releasing a faint scent of old earth, ozone, and recycled air. Inside, soft yellow light illuminated a corridor that stretched into the mountain's interior. Smooth metal walls, old but pristine. A facility perfectly preserved in silence. A fortress built in secret, forgotten by time, waiting for someone, or waiting for him. Ethan felt something shift in Hawk. Not physically, something deeper. The dog stood taller, eyes shining with certainty, as if a burden he'd carried through snow and storm had finally come to rest. Ethan swallowed hard. "All right, Hawk, let's see what you've been trying to show me." Together they stepped inside the bunker, and the door slid shut behind them with a finality. That sounded almost like destiny closing in. The corridor opened into a circular chamber that looked frozen in time. The air was crisp, filtered, almost too clean. The soft hum of machinery echoed through the steel walls, steady and unbroken, as if the facility had waited 70 years for someone to walk through its door. Ethan scanned the room with the trained caution he hadn't used since the Air Force. A row of old communication terminals curved along one side, their screens dark, but not dead. A bunk with a neatly folded wool blanket sat untouched against the wall. And in the center, facing a semicircle of monitors, stood the control desk. Dust barely coated its surface, like someone had wiped it down not long before vanishing. Hawk padded across the floor with purpose. He didn't sniff or explore. He went straight to the nearest console and placed his paw on a faintly glowing pressure plate Ethan hadn't noticed. The screens flickered. Ethan's breath caught. Lines of code raced upward in pale green fonts, the kind used in Cold War command systems. The main monitor stuttered, froze, then opened into a single black window with a blinking cursor waiting for input. A prompt flashed. Access granted. Initiating final directive. A soft click echoed from behind the console. Something inside the desk unlocked. Ethan reached down and slid open a concealed panel, revealing a small metal box about the size of a hard-bound book. Inside was a single drive. Obsolete technology, but military-grade, thick, shielded, designed to last decades. A notification appeared on the main monitor. Play recorded message. Ethan hesitated. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. Hawk stepped closer, nudging Ethan's elbow gently. A quiet reassurance, or a command. Ethan pressed enter. The screen went black for a moment before a grainy image filled it. A man sat in the same chair Ethan now occupied. His uniform was dated, the style unmistakably mid-20th century. His hair was slicked back, face lined with exhaustion and urgency. But his eyes were sharp, alive, intelligent. Major James Harper. Ethan's pulse thudded in his ears. He knew the name the way soldiers know legends. Men whispered that Harper had stumbled onto something during the early Cold War and vanished without a trace. Harper leaned in towards the camera. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight that cut through 70 years. If you are hearing this, the Sentinel Protocol has succeeded beyond my lifetime, which means I failed my mission, and someone else is paying the price. Ethan's stomach tightened. Harper continued, his tone unflinching. Helix Defense has infiltrated our intelligence channels. They have been feeding curated data to manipulate operations, not for ideology, for profit. They sell conflict to the highest bidder and prolong wars to control outcomes. Behind him, the monitors glowed with documents. Ethan recognized the format even through the distortion. Financial ledgers, intercepts, secret communiques. Harper's jaw tightened. I recorded everything. Proof that Helix has been coordinating with foreign handlers since the 40s. Proof that American blood has been traded like currency. He paused, forcing a shaky breath. They discovered my investigation. My team is gone. My orders are to disappear quietly, to let the truth die with me. But I refuse. Harper leaned forward again, lowering his voice. The bunker will remain sealed until someone Helix cannot predict arrives. A successor. Someone carrying the same tactical signal imprint we developed in Project Sentinel. Someone chosen not by clearance but by instinct. By loyalty. His eyes softened, almost mournful. That someone was meant to be you, Captain Barron. Ethan flinched, his throat closed. Tom Barron. Harper pressed his lips together. If Barron did not survive, then whoever wears his signal echo is the last hope. Ethan felt his pulse thunder in his ears. 8 years ago, he and Tom had been fitted with an experimental coded impulse harness during a joint rescue operation. They joked that they were being turned into walking antennas. Apparently, it had been something far more deliberate. Hawk moved beside Ethan again, sitting at attention, eyes fixed on Harper's fading image. The screen glitched, then sharpened. Harper reached out of frame, and a young German shepherd padded into view, not Hawk, but nearly identical. Same silver fur, same amber eyes, the same quiet authority. Harper rested a hand on the dog's neck. This is Argus, first-generation Sentinel lineage. His descendants will carry a biological cipher engineered to unlock this bunker. They will find the one person capable of finishing what I could not. He looked straight into the camera, as if he could see Ethan across 70 years. If you are here, then Helix is still alive, and they will come for you. My evidence is inside this system, fragmented but recoverable. The world must know what they have done. His voice dimmed, edges fraying with static. Trust the dog. Trust the instinct that led you here. And above all, do not hesitate. The truth was buried for 70 years. You were chosen to bring it back into the light. The recording froze on Harper's face, eyes steady even in pixelation. Ethan took a step back. His legs shook. Tom, Harper, Sentinel, the bunker, Hawk's arrival. None of it was coincidence. Hawk pressed against Ethan's thigh, grounding him. Ethan knelt slowly, gripping the fur behind Hawk's neck. You weren't looking for help, he whispered. You were looking for Tom, for his signal. And I'm all that's left. Hawk leaned into him, a soft exhale answering everything Harper had left unsaid. A sudden rumble tremored through the bunker floor. Ethan jerked upright. The lights flickered. Hawk's ears snapped toward the corridor, alert, rigid. The bunker had sensed something, a seismic shift, or movement outside. Someone else might not be far behind. Ethan faced the doorway, heart pounding, while Hawk moved ahead of him, posture straight, ready. The truth was awake now, and so was the danger. The bunker felt different once Harper's voice faded. The silence no longer felt abandoned. It felt expectant, heavy with 70 years of secrets pressing against the walls. The air hummed with the faint electrical pulse of machines waking from long sleep. Ethan moved to the central terminal, Hawk walked beside him, unhurried, as if he'd walked this bunker 100 times before. Ethan sat and slid the encrypted drive into the ancient port. The system recognized it instantly and began assembling fragments, one by one. A directory flickered open. Recovered files. 147 corrupted files, 389 hidden archives, 12 Ethan leaned in, pulse spiking. The first set labeled Financial Channels Loaded. A spreadsheet unfolded across the screen, scrolling automatically. Columns of numbers, transfers, shell corporations, offshore accounts, names of front companies disguised as logistics outfits, humanitarian organizations, agricultural suppliers. 70 years of money, all leading back to Helix defense. Billions moved quietly from conflict zones to Helix subsidiaries. Patterns designed to be invisible unless someone knew exactly what to look for. Harper knew. The next archive opened by itself, as if the system anticipated Ethan's focus. Intercept logs appeared. Encrypted communications between Helix operatives and foreign handlers. Shipments scheduled under false diplomatic clearance. Weapons routed to both sides of proxy wars. Helix had armed enemies and allies alike, prolonging battles so they could profit from the cycle. Ethan swallowed hard. How many lives had been manipulated because a corporation wanted chaos to keep paying? The last recovered file labeled Harper Private flickered into view. Ethan clicked. A series of still images appeared first. Harper's handwriting scrawled across yellowed notepads. Photos of surveillance documents, then a final video clip loaded. Harper's face once again filled the screen. His tone was different in this recording. Harder. If you're watching this file, it means they killed me. Ethan's chest tightened. Helix executed every member of my team. They staged my death as an accident. Branded me a traitor to erase what I uncovered. They will keep doing it. Across generations, if necessary. Static cracked across the image. Harper leaned forward. Whoever receives this must expose them. I paid in blood. You may pay more. But truth buried this long rots the foundation it sits under. The video ended without ceremony. Ethan sat frozen, staring at the blank screen. He wasn't just studying history. He was staring at the ruins of 2 lifetimes. Harper's, Tom's, and now his own. A sound broke the stillness. Hawk nudged Ethan's boots, then turned and trotted toward a dark corner of the chamber. The dog glanced back, impatient, giving a short huff. What is it now? Hawk pawed at a section of wall. Not random scratching. Precise taps on a single panel slightly recessed into the metal. Ethan approached and felt for seams. There, a thin vertical line. He pressed. The panel clicked and slid sideways, revealing a narrow entrance. Behind it lay a stairway descending deeper into the mountain. Hawk didn't wait for permission. He descended confidently, head lowered, scanning each step with the attention of a trained scout. Ethan followed. The stairwell opened into a room larger than any they had seen. The air was colder here, metallic. Lights flickered awake as they stepped inside. An armory. Not a normal one, but a Cold War Black Ops vault. Racks of prototype gear lined the walls. Non-lethal weapon systems decades ahead of their time. Tactical radios built for deep-range frequency hopping. A pair of reinforced suits designed for mountain infiltration teams. Ethan's eyes widened. Harper wasn't lying. Sentinel wasn't a myth. Hawk walked straight to a metal crate set apart from the rest, placed deliberately on a pedestal. His tail lowered, his posture shifted. Respectful, almost ceremonial. Ethan approached slowly. The crate was old but immaculate. Heavy steel, riveted edges, and carved into the lid with steady, deliberate strokes were words that made Ethan's breath stop. For the one the dog chooses. Ethan froze. Those words weren't a message, they were a verdict. Hawk sat beside the crate, staring at Ethan with those amber eyes that had followed him through storms and led him into the earth itself. Ethan rested his palms on the lid. A locking mechanism clicked under his touch, as if responding not to weight, but recognition. The lid opened. Inside lay a sealed envelope, yellowed with age, a key made of brushed steel, and beneath them, a compact tactical device unlike anything Ethan had handled. Lightweight, matte black, carved with the symbol of Sentinel K9, a wolf head merged with a circuit schematic. The envelope had a single line written across it. If Baron falls, follow the echo. Ethan's breath hitched. Tom, this bunker, Hawk, all of it tied through a line drawn across decades. He opened the envelope. Inside was a short, handwritten note from Harper. Your team was selected because loyalty cannot be taught. When Helix killed my men, they killed my future. But the signal echo survives in those who carry it in their bones. If you are here, Captain Baron is gone. But someone he trusted is not. Ethan closed his eyes. The memory of Tom's voice in that final mission flooded back. If anything happens to me, Ro, take my signal. Someone out there will know what to do with it. He had laughed then, brushed it off. But Tom had known. Hawk rested his head against Ethan's knee, the same gesture he'd given outside the cabin. Ethan placed a hand on the dog's neck, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breaths. Harper had chosen a bloodline of dogs to protect the truth. Tom had chosen Ethan to carry the echo. Hawk had chosen Ethan to finish it. Ethan opened his eyes as the bunker lights dimmed for a moment, humming deeper. Something was happening on the surface, something drawing closer. Hawk stiffened, ears pinned forward, body shifting into alert posture. Ethan felt it too. The past had woken, and the present was about to answer. The moment the final archive unlocked, something in the bunker shifted. Not physically, digitally. A soft chirp echoed from the terminal, almost innocent. Initializing legacy beacon. Transmission detected. Helix tracking protocol engaged. Ethan's stomach tightened. He didn't trigger any outbound messages. The system must have auto-pinged a dormant network Harper built in the 50s. A network Helix had spent decades watching for. Hawk growled before the alarms started. A deep, rhythmic vibration rolled through the rock above them. Then another. Not thunder, not avalanche. Rotor wash. Ethan sprinted to the surveillance console. The fossil switch Hawk used earlier still glowed faintly blue. He hit it, and the cavern walls lit with a mosaic of real-time feeds from micro-cameras buried in the snow. The world outside had turned black. Not from night. From the shadow of a massive aircraft sweeping low over the Bitterroot tree line. A stealth insertion helicopter. Military grade. Absolutely not supposed to exist. Figures dropped through the swirling snow one by one, landing with precise, almost mechanical coordination. 10 of them. All in matte white winter assault suits, faces covered, weapons suppressed, and short-barreled for close-quarters mountain combat. Task Unit Mercury. Ethan muttered under his breath. Helix just emptied their top shelf. The commander stepped forward, giving hand signals. Ethan zoomed in. He froze. Rourke, same square jaw, same stone-hard posture, same scar under his right eye Ethan had seen 100 times under training helmets. He hadn't seen Rourke since their fallout 6 years ago, when Rourke had pinned a failed extraction on Ethan. A lie that destroyed Ethan's career, long before grief finished the job. Now Rourke worked for Helix. Hawk sensed the shift in Ethan's breathing and pressed against his leg, eyes locked on the screens. Ethan exhaled shakily, grounding himself in the dog's calm presence. On camera, Mercury fanned out like a hunting pack. Laser grids swept the snow. Portable GPR units were deployed. Their formation tightened around the granite cliff. They were searching for a door they had been told didn't exist. A door built to defy detection. But even the best camouflage could be eroded by time and relentless technology. "All right, boy," Ethan murmured. "We don't let them find it." Hawk moved first, as if knowing where they needed to be before Ethan even finished the thought. He padded to the recessed floor panel again and tapped it twice. The hidden defensive system map rose like a hologram from the command table. Green icons pulsed. Flash traps. Acoustic. Concussives. Net snares. Strobe disorienters. All designed by Harper to stop intruders without killing them. Ethan followed Hawk to the activation board. "You sure about this?" he whispered. Hawk turned, eyes sharp, steady, unwavering. Decision made. Ethan hit the first switch. Outside, 2 of Mercury's scouts knelt to adjust their radar sleds. A sudden explosive blast of sound roared from beneath the snow, like the mountain itself bellowing. They staggered backward, helmets ringing, disoriented but alive. Non-lethal. Effective. Mercury tightened formation instantly. They swept their rifles across the shadows, assuming enemy contact. Ethan activated a second trap. Buried strobes erupted in a pulse of white light, igniting the storm like lightning. 3 operators jerked back, blinded momentarily. "No casualties," Ethan murmured, half to himself, half to the ghosts that still lingered in his conscience. Just noise, just warning. But Mercury adapted quickly. They began moving slower, methodical, covering each other with disturbingly disciplined precision. These men were good. Too good. A crackle of digital interference flashed across the screens. Mercury had deployed counter-jammers, trying to punch through the bunker's static field. "Hold it together," Ethan whispered, watching power grid lines spike. "Come on, Harper. Tell me you built this to last." The bunker lights flickered, then steadied. Hawk barked once, sharp and decisive. Not panic. Instruction. Ethan followed his gaze. One of Mercury's operatives planted a seismic spike. Another assembled an industrial drill rig, portable, battery-powered, and meant to chew through mountain rock. "They're trying to find the hollow." Ethan clenched his jaw. "Once they map the cavity, they'll know exactly where the door is." On the far screen, Rourke lifted his visor, watching the cliff with unsettling confidence. He knew Ethan well enough to know Ethan was close. He touched his earpiece, speaking to his team. The feed didn't catch audio, but Ethan understood the gesture. Find him alive. Rourke didn't come for the bunker. He came for Ethan. Ethan's pulse raced, old scars burning. He remembered the last argument with Rourke, the betrayal, the accusation that Ethan had frozen, costing a teammate his life. The lie Helix later exploited when they recruited Rourke. Hawk sensed Ethan's anger rising and nudged his hand, grounding him again, reminding him of the task, the mission, the legacy. A team of 10 elite operators against a man and a dog. But they weren't normal opponents. And this wasn't an empty bunker. Ethan flicked 3 more switches. Outside, nets shot upward from the snow like steel webs, snapping 2 men completely off their feet. Another concussive blast erupted under a 3rd operator's boots, hurling him backward into a drift. They scrambled, weapons raised, but the traps were everywhere and nowhere. Mercury's formation faltered for the first time. Ethan exhaled. Not relief. Focus. But the brief advantage vanished when Rourke stepped forward. He lifted a compact black device. Not military issue. Experimental. Ethan recognized it from old DARPA prototypes, a portable harmonic resonator designed to read micro-vibrations. It didn't find doors, it found motion. Rourke activated it. The resonator hummed, low and ominous. Snowflakes around him jittered violently. The machine scanned the mountain's surface, mapping vibrations through stone. Ethan's blood ran cold. They're going to find the passage. Hawk's ears flattened. He growled deep, a warning that chilled Ethan even more. Then came the twist. The resonator locked onto a faint tremor in the cliff. Rourke read the device, face breaking into a slow, cold smile. He didn't point at the bunker door. He pointed at the exact tunnel Ethan and Hawk used to enter the bunker the first time. Rourke wasn't trying to breach the front. He was trying to trap them inside. He motioned to his men. The drill team pivoted. The operators shifted formation. They began anchoring a line of shaped charges along the chamber ceiling line detected by the resonator. Detonate them, and the mountain would collapse, entombing the bunker. Hawk barked sharply, twice, urgent, commanding. Ethan knelt beside him. "We're not staying?" Ethan asked quietly. Hawk stared straight at him, amber eyes blazing with absolute certainty. They had to move. Now. The dog had chosen the next step long before Ethan realized what was happening. The siege had begun, and the only way to survive was to break out before the mountain came down. The escape tunnel was barely wider than Ethan's shoulders, a frozen artery carved beneath the mountain. Water dripped from the ceiling. The air was metallic and stale. Hawk led the way without hesitation, paws silent on the stone, his tail a steady beacon in the dark. Above them, muted thuds shook dust from the ceiling. Mercury was placing the final charges. Ethan quickened his pace. The tunnel sloped downward, then curved sharply before rising again. Finally, a glimmer of pale blue light seeped through a thin crack ahead. Hawk pressed his nose to the seam. Ethan pushed, and a sheet of ice broke outward, spilling them into a hollow behind a cluster of snow-heavy pines. When Ethan stood and wiped his face, he realized where they were. 200 yards behind Mercury's formation, their blind side. The same stealth tactic he once used in rescue operations. Slip under the chaos and come up where no one expects. Ethan scanned the clearing. Mercury had divided into 2 groups. 5 were wiring the charges. 5 guarded the perimeter with tactical discipline. Rourke stood near the command sled, helmet off, wind ripping through his dark hair, eyes fixed on the cliff. He looked colder than the storm. Ethan breathed slowly. The soldier in him, the one he had buried, rose again. Purpose replaced fear. Training drowned the doubt. He slung Harper's compact tactical device over his chest, checked the tranquilizer cartridges in his rescue tech kit, and looked to Hawk. "You ready?" Hawk crouched low, muscles taut. "Ready." Ethan moved first. He slipped through the trees, using the storm as cover. Mercury relied on radar, thermals, and motion sensors. Without them, their awareness was human, and Ethan knew exactly how to beat human. He reached the first operator. The man scanned the tree line, unaware of the shadow closing behind him. A hand clamped his mouth. A tranquilizer needle jabbed into his neck. The operator sagged silently into Ethan's arms. One down. Hawk lunged through the snow at the second guard, a silent grey streak. He hit the man center mass, knocking him flat. His jaws clamped around the rifle, yanking it away. Ethan caught up, pressed a tranquilizer into the exposed patch at the guard's collar, and pulled Hawk back. 2 down. Another operator heard movement and swung his rifle towards the trees. Ethan dropped into a slide under the weapon barrel, hooked the man's legs, and twisted sharply. The operator fell, and Ethan jabbed a second cartridge into his thigh before he could shout. 3. The fourth guard spun toward the commotion, flicking up his visor. Ethan froze. Ramirez, one of the good ones, one of the men who had defended Ethan back when Rourke lied about the mission failure. Ramirez blinked, recognition breaking through shock. "Row." Ethan lifted a finger to his lips. Ramirez hesitated, then stepped aside, intentionally turning his back so Ethan could move past him unnoticed. A silent pact. A debt repaid. Ethan ghosted forward. Now the charges team. He approached from the rear, slipping through swirling snow. One operator knelt over the resonator pack. Ethan grabbed his shoulder, twisted, and struck a pressure point. The man collapsed quietly. Another tried to draw his knife. Hawk barreled into him, jaws locking around the forearm, not breaking, only pinning. Ethan injected the tranquilizer. The last two stepped back to back, sensing something was wrong. Ethan didn't hesitate. He fired Harper's device. A focused burst of sonic force erupted, slamming into both men and sending them sprawling. Before they regained orientation, he neutralized them. Within 90 seconds, 8 of Mercury's elite lay unconscious in the snow. Only one remained. Rourke. Ethan turned toward the command sled. Empty. A soft crunch of snow behind him. Always were predictable, Roe. Ethan spun, but too late. Rourke tackled him from the side, driving him into the drifts. The wind burst from Ethan's lungs. Rourke's elbow struck his jaw, sharp and merciless. "You think you can take my men?" Rourke snarled. "After what you did?" Ethan rolled, blocked a knee strike, and thrust upward. The two men grappled violently, sliding across the snow. "You lied," Ethan growled, forcing Rourke's hand away from the knife strapped to his thigh. "You blamed me for Baron. You killed the extraction—" Rourke laughed, a dark, cold sound. "You still don't get it, do you? Tom Baron wasn't supposed to leave that canyon alive. Helix had already bought the contract." Ethan's blood froze. "You set him up," Ethan whispered. "You sold him out." Rourke slammed Ethan into the ground again, knife flashing free. "He was never the target." Rourke hissed. "You were. Baron just got in the way." Rourke raised the blade. Hawk hit him like a meteor. The dog exploded from the tree line, jaws clamping down on Rourke's wrist with terrifying precision. The knife flew from his hand, skittering across the ice. Rourke howled, trying to wrench free, but Hawk's grip held firm, measured, controlled, disabling without tearing. Exactly what a Sentinel K9 was trained to do. Ethan surged to his feet, disarmed Rourke completely, and pinned him face first into the snow. "You murdered him," Ethan said, voice trembling not with fear but fury. "Tom died because of you." Rourke spat blood into the snow. "Helix pays more than loyalty ever did." Hawk growled low, the sound vibrating through the clearing. Ethan didn't hit Rourke. Didn't need to. The truth itself landed harder than any strike. Behind them, the air vibrated with distant rotor wash. Another aircraft. Reinforcements. Ethan met Hawk's eyes. "We're not done yet, but we're not running either." Hawk stepped beside him, posture proud, gaze fierce. For the first time in years, Ethan felt the soldier in him fully awake. Sharp, alert, steady. A man with nothing left to lose, a dog with a legacy to protect, and a truth Helix would burn the world to bury. The real fight was only beginning. The storm had begun to ease by the time Ethan dragged Rourke's bound form into the shadow of the ridge. The fallen operators lay sedated in the snow, wrists secured, weapons tossed far out of reach. The Bitterroot wilderness had gone strangely quiet, the kind of stillness that felt like the world was holding its breath. Hawk stood guard beside Rourke, tail stiff, amber eyes locked on the man who had shattered 2 generations of loyalty. Every time Rourke shifted, even an inch, Hawk's low growl vibrated through the frozen air. Ethan knelt beside his pack and pulled out Harper's encrypted data vault. The metal edges were cold under his fingertips, every scrape and dent a reminder of how long it had waited for this moment. He powered on his portable uplink device. The screen lit with a weak signal. Enough. He opened a secure channel and typed a single address. Megan Ayers, investigative reporter. The woman who once tore apart a senator's defense contract with nothing more than a thumb drive and a refusal to be intimidated. Ethan hesitated for a moment. What he was about to release wasn't just a story, it was a 70-year-long wound. He hit send. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then the uplink blinked. Transfer initiated. Hawk stepped closer, nuzzling Ethan's shoulder as if urging him not to flinch. The files poured through the encrypted channel. Harper's videos, the Helix transfer ledgers, the intercepted communications with foreign intelligence, the mission orders that condemned Harper in 1953, the doctored operational logs, the recordings proving that Tom Barron was targeted long before he ever set foot on that fatal mission. And finally, Rourke's confession, captured by Ethan's chest camera during the fight. Another ping. Transfer complete. Ethan exhaled, the breath unsteady. The truth was no longer buried in a bunker. It was free. Hawk pressed his head against Ethan's arm, warm and solid and impossibly grounding. "Yeah," Ethan whispered. "We did it." He didn't expect Megan to respond. Not immediately. Not in the middle of a blizzard. But she did. A video window opened. Her face appeared, sharp, alert, surrounded by the glow of multiple monitors. "Ethan Rowe," she said quietly. "I've heard that name more times than you'd believe." "Then you know I didn't kill Tom." She held his gaze. "No, but I know exactly who did." Her eyes flicked across the files, widening as she scrolled. "My God, Harper was right. Helix was running a shadow program since the Eisenhower administration, and Barron, they used him the same way they used Harper." A pause. "You understand what happens when I release this?" "I do. You'll be hunted. I already am." For a moment, neither spoke. Then Megan leaned closer to the camera. "Leave Rourke where he is. Coordinates?" Ethan sent them. "Local law enforcement will be there in an hour," she said. "Federal agents by morning. And when they see what he's carrying, he's done." She hesitated, then added, "What you sent me. This is the biggest defense corruption scandal since Iran-Contra. Possibly bigger." Her voice softened. "You just killed a giant, Ethan. Thank you." The call ended. Ethan looked down at Hawk. "And now," he murmured, "we wait." He didn't have to wait long. By sunrise, the first tremors hit. Not in the ground. On the airwaves. Megan's story detonated like a shockwave. Every news channel, every front page, every political commentator who had ever warned about private militarization. The headlines built on one another, a landslide of consequences. Cold War Sentinel program exposed. Defense giant Helix accused of funding covert foreign operations. 70 years of hidden payments uncovered. Congress demands emergency hearings. And then the one that made Ethan's throat tighten. Fallen airman Tom Barron vindicated. Harper, Barron, 2 names restored in one morning. Ethan watched the coverage from a small emergency shelter half a mile from the bunker's collapsed entrance. Hawk sat beside him, watching the images flicker across Ethan's phone screen as though he understood every word. Live television, FBI agents raided Helix Defense Headquarters. Executives in suits were led out in handcuffs. Servers were seized. Private security forces were disarmed. And finally, Rourke. A shaky helicopter shot captured him in restraints, frost clinging to his hair, fury burning through defeat as he was marched toward a federal convoy. "For the record," an agent shouted over the wind, "you are charged with obstruction of justice, treason, participation in a classified assassination plot, and conspiracy to commit murder against Lieutenant Colonel James Harper, deceased." Rourke snapped. "You don't know who you're dealing with." Hawk barked at the screen so sharply that Ethan jumped. He looked at the dog, then at the screen. And for the first time, Ethan laughed. A real laugh. Hawk's growl deepened as Rourke was shoved into the transport van. Justice. Slow. Delayed by decades. But justice. Megan Ayres appeared outside the Capitol a few hours later, speaking into a dozen microphones. "This wasn't just a conspiracy," she said. "It was a legacy of corruption that spanned generations. One man died trying to expose it in 1953, another in 2015, but thanks to the courage of a former Air Force rescue technician and a remarkable German shepherd, the truth is finally out." Ethan stared at the screen. A remarkable German shepherd. Hawk lifted his head, proud, standing taller than he ever had. Ethan placed a hand on his back. "You earned that one, bud." Outside, snow drifted gently, quiet and peaceful for the first time since the nightmare began. The mountain felt lighter, as if a weight 70 years old had finally lifted. Hawk nudged Ethan's side, not urging him, not warning him this time, just reminding him he wasn't alone. Ethan breathed in the cold morning air. A new kind of air, one not poisoned by guilt. The truth was free. Helix was falling. And somewhere, in the quiet places men rarely looked, Harper and Barron finally had their names back. Ethan looked at Hawk. "Come on," he said softly. "Let's go home." Hawk walked beside him, head high, tail steady, the living link between past and future. The dog who chose him. The dog who saved the truth. The mountain was quiet again. Not silent in the way it had been when Ethan first arrived in the Bitterroot, when the quiet had felt like a tomb. This was different. This was the quiet that comes after truth has shaken loose the rot in its bones, after a storm has ended and left the sky scrubbed clean. Ethan stood at the threshold of the Cold War bunker one last time, Hawk sitting beside him like a stone sentinel carved out of winter itself. The steel door, still scarred from decades of frost, towered before them. He slipped Harper's final key into the control panel. A soft tone chimed. "Thermal lockdown sequence initiated," the synthesized voice said. "All systems will enter permanent stasis in 60 seconds. Ethan looked at Hawk. "Once it seals, no one's ever getting back in." Hawk didn't blink. He held Ethan's gaze, steady and unflinching, a soldier accepting the closing of a battlefield. The corridor lights dimmed in sections, each row of bulbs flicking off like the slow closing of eyelids. Machinery deep in the walls began to wind down, first a hum, then a whisper, then absolute stillness. The geothermal generator throttled back into a dormant state, then clicked into sleep. Ethan stepped away as the massive door slid shut. The sound echoed like thunder trapped underground. A second panel lowered over the entrance, then a third. Then a reinforced avalanche barrier began to descend from the roof of the cliff. Harper had built the place to survive the end of the world. Ethan was burying it alive. Stone scraped against steel. A deep grinding rolled across the mountainside. Then, with a final rumble, the entrance disappeared beneath tons of granite. What had been a gateway to 70 years of secrets was now just a blank piece of mountainside, unremarkable and untouched. Somewhere behind that wall lay Harper's ghosts, the Sentinel program, and all the lives Helix had tried to erase. Now none of it would ever be used again. Ethan shoved his hands into the pockets of his jacket and exhaled. "That's it," he murmured. "It's done." Hawk stepped closer, bumping his shoulder into Ethan's leg as if to steady him. Ethan leaned down, placing a hand on the dog's back. The fur was warm under his palm, warmer than the air, warmer than anything had felt in a long time. "Let's get out of here," he whispered. "We've both earned something better." They started down the mountain. The snow, once a suffocating wall of white, had softened into spring slush. Here and there, patches of green poked through. Pine needles glistened. The air smelled faintly of thawing earth, sap, and distant rain, like the world was waking up. Every step away from the bunker felt like shedding another layer of weight he'd worn for years. Guilt, isolation, failure. The endless loop of Tom Barron's death replaying in his mind. Hawk trotted beside him, occasionally glancing back as if making sure Ethan still followed. He didn't limp anymore. The storm scars had healed. So had something deeper. Ethan stopped at a ridge where he could look out across the bitterroot forest. From here, he could almost see the path the dog had taken the first night, the impossible trail through snow and darkness that had dragged Ethan back into the world. "You found me," Ethan said softly. "You pulled me out." Hawk sat. He didn't look heroic or mystical. He just looked present, alive, steady. But there was something in his eyes, an understanding that went beyond instinct. "You weren't just following training," Ethan said. "You knew I needed to see that truth." Hawk blinked once. A simple gesture, but enough. They continued down until they reached Ethan's old cabin at the tree line. The structure still leaned like a wounded animal, windows half-frosted, smoke long since dead in the hearth. Ethan stepped inside. The foreclosure notice lay where he had left it. A letter from a life that didn't fit anymore. He picked it up, crumpled it, then tossed it into the cold fireplace. Not my problem anymore. When he stepped back outside, sunlight was breaking through the cloud cover. Gold lit the snow, scattering it in 1,000 small reflections. Hawk barked once, short, sharp. A call to move. Ethan slung his pack over his shoulder. "No plan," he muttered. "No orders, no mission." It felt strange, but not empty. "Guess we figure it out as we go." Hawk walked ahead, tail swinging confidently, picking a direction as if he already knew where they should go next. Ethan laughed under his breath. "You're leading again." "All right, why not?" They hiked down the slope toward the dirt road, where Ethan's truck sat half buried in snow. The engine coughed to life on the third try, sputtering like an old man clearing his throat. Hawk climbed into the passenger seat. He propped his paws on the dashboard and stuck his head briefly out the cracked window, inhaling the air as if tasting freedom. Ethan watched him, a smile breaking slowly across his face. The road ahead stretched between tall pines. No maps, no deadlines, just open distance. "Let's go, partner," Ethan said. He drove forward. The truck rumbled over the thawing dirt. The forest opened wider. 2 wanderers leaving behind 70 years of buried ghosts. One man finally stepping out of his past, and one sentinel shepherd who had never once given up on his mission. Together they followed the long road out of Bitterroot Valley, toward spring, toward whatever waited next. The Bitterroot air was different in spring. Softer, warmer, carriesless of the weight it once held. A year had passed since the night Hawk tore through a blizzard and rewrote the ending of a story that had been buried for 70 long years. Now, at the foot of a modest white memorial stone overlooking a quiet Montana valley, people gathered to honor the man who tried to expose the truth long before the world was ready to hear it. Major James Harper, cleared of treason, restored as a hero. A brass plaque beneath his name read, "Truth outlives those who try to bury it." Ethan stood among the small crowd, hands tucked into his jacket pockets, his posture relaxed in a way it hadn't been for years. Not rigid, not defensive, just present. Beside him sat Hawk, posture straight, chest broad, eyes scanning the gathering with that calm steadiness that had become his signature. Children approached him like he was legend. Veterans approached him like he was family. Journalists approached him like he was myth. Hawk accepted it all with quiet dignity. He had earned every second. Ethan watched as a family placed a bundle of wildflowers at Harper's stone. Megan Ayers stood farther back, notebook tucked under her arm, giving the moment to those who needed it most. FBI agents, journalists, state officials, they had all shown up. But it was Hawk they gravitated toward. A reporter finally stepped forward, mic in hand, eyes bright for a soundbite. "Mr. Rowe," she asked gently, "one question. Why do you think that stray dog crossed a blizzard to find you? Of all people?" Ethan didn't answer immediately. He looked down at Hawk. The dog tilted his head slightly, amber eyes reflecting the sky, the valley, the world he had helped reshape. A thin breeze swept through the field, carrying the scent of pine and the echo of a long-quieted storm. Ethan placed his hand on Hawk's head, fingers sinking into the thick fur. "He didn't bark for danger," Ethan said softly. "He barked for the truth." He paused, feeling every word settle into the air. Truth buried for 70 years. Cameras clicked. Someone in the crowd wiped their eyes. Harper's granddaughter clasped her hands to her chest. Another reporter leaned in. "Do you think he knew? The whole time?" Ethan chuckled, shaking his head. "Knowing isn't the right word," he said. "Hawk isn't just instinct. He's purpose. Someone decades before us trusted a dog to carry a final message. And Hawk, he carried it across generations." He looked at Hawk again, and he carried me back to myself. Hawk gave a soft, quiet woof, as if confirming the truth of it. Behind them, the ceremony continued. Officials spoke about justice and perseverance. Veterans saluted Harper's stone. Families stood hand in hand. But people kept glancing back to the man and the dog who had brought the truth into daylight. Ethan stepped away from the memorial with Hawk trotting beside him. They followed a dirt path leading down toward the valley, where spring grass brushed their boots and paws. "You realize," Ethan murmured, "you're famous now, right?" Hawk ignored him, nose lifted to the breeze, tail swishing with measured pride. He wasn't interested in fame, only in people, and truth, and in the man he had chosen that winter night. Ethan's phone buzzed in his pocket. A message from Megan. "Congress wants you at the hearing next week. Bring the dog." Ethan laughed out loud. He always gets the invites. Hawk barked once, triumphant, almost smug. The sun dipped behind a ridge, coating the valley in gold. Ethan knelt, wrapping his arm around Hawk's shoulders. "You ready for whatever comes next?" he asked. Hawk pressed his forehead gently into Ethan's chest. A yes, without words. They walked on until the ceremony grew small behind them, the wind carrying faint echoes of applause and distant gratitude. At the edge of the meadow, Ethan stopped and faced the horizon. "Funny thing," he said quietly. "I thought I'd spend my life running from the past. Turns out the past sent a dog to drag me back, just so I could walk forward again." Hawk nudged Ethan's hand, urging him down the path. The world felt wide again. Not threatening, not empty, just open. Before they disappeared into the tree line, Ethan glanced back at the camera crews and the gathered families. And he spoke, not to them, but through them. "You know," he said with a soft smile, "everyone has a story about a loyal dog, one that showed up when life hit hardest." He looked at Hawk. "So what's yours?" A final note rose in the air, carried by spring wind. A question, a reminder, a calling. "What's your story with a loyal pet?" And with Hawk leading the way, Ethan Rowe stepped into the new season, into a life reclaimed, and into every future that awaited them beyond the mountains. If this story touched your heart, we invite you to stay with us, to follow more journeys of courage and devotion. Support the channel, share the story, and honor the incredible spirit of the German Shepherd. Their loyalty changes everything.